Next topic is JavaScript Advanced. So here we are going to cover some advanced topics of JavaScript programming language. So the first topic is JavaScript function as a first class object. So as we have covered in our previous presentation, when you actually see the function statement, basically is creating function object, and it is a genuine object, like a string object and number object. So we're going to actually cover that aspect in a bit more detail. We'll talk about the concept of self-invoking function or immediate function, and we are going to see function scope, and we are going to cover the concept of closure. Okay, what is closure and why use closure? And then the last topic in this presentation is global object and non-global object and the concept of this. JavaScript functions as first class object. So function is a first class object like a string object or number object. Functions are a bit like a Java methods, so they have arguments and return values, and they can contain any number of JavaScript statements for performing some tasks. That is the same in Java. However, the difference from Java, at least up to Java 7, in JavaScript, a function object is a first class object, just like any other first class object such as a string object and number object. A function object, because it's an object, it is considered as a descendant of object and can do everything a regular JavaScript object like a string object or number object can do, such as having properties and the values. Okay, so as I said before, every object in JavaScript is basically a hash key value pair. Key value pairs, and Java function object, because it's a genuine JavaScript object, is again the set of key value pairs. Function objects can have other function objects as method. Okay, so as I said before, a method is basically a property of a JavaScript object whose value happens to be a function object. Right? Okay, so function object is a key value pairs, and those value could be another function object. Okay. Now, when I say a function object is a first class object, basically what I'm saying is that it's behaving like a first class object, like a string object. What I mean by that is that it can be saved into a variable, like a string object can be saved into a variable, as we have seen in several examples already. It can be passed as an argument to another function, just like a string object or a number object could be passed around as an argument. And it can be returned as an object. So it's a genuine object. So we're going to actually take a look at each of these example cases. The first, function object can be assigned to a variable. So we have seen these examples already in our previous presentation. So we define a function. So again, when this function definition is processed, a function object gets created and is assigned into a property of owning object with a name of, in this case, my method. The key point is that function object gets created. Okay, and then you're saving the function object. So you are going to reference my method, okay, function object, into a variable. So this is an example where we are assigning a function object as a value to this variable. Okay. You can invoke the function. So this is the explicit invocation of the function. So here, this variable contains a function object, so we should be able to invoke it, just like we are invoking a method in Java. Okay. You can save anonymous function into a variable. So this is an example we have seen already as well. So we have a function expression which doesn't have a name, and we are assigning it to, in this case, another variable. Okay, and then we can also invoke that function. Okay, this is a case that we have a function which has an explicit name, and this is a case that we do not have explicit name. And so this is called the anonymous function, but this is still creating a function object and assigning to my function var2 variable. Okay, any question on this slide? Okay, all right. Second case, a function object can be passed around as an argument to another function. So in this example, we define a function. Okay, so this is my method function, which takes a single argument called x. Okay, and then we are going to define another function called your method. Okay, and this is basically receiving an argument as y. Okay, and assuming y is a function object, we are going to invoke it. Okay, so in this case, basically we are passing, so my method is a function object. We are passing my method function object as an argument to another method. So your method is receiving a function object as an argument. Once it receives that the function object as an argument, it can invoke it. Okay, so this is an example where function object could be passed around. Okay, any question on this? Okay, so let's see the third example where function object can be returned as a return value. So we define a function here, function object called my method. Okay, and then we have a his method, which returns my method function object as a return value. Okay, so in this example, we are going to call his method. So this is the method which returns my method function object as a return value, and then we are assigning it to y. So y variable contains a function object, so we should be able to invoke it. Does this make sense? Okay, all right, cool. So we're going to do exercise 1. So again, you are going to unzip the file is 4266 JavaScript _advanced.zip file, and you unzip it and you are going to read index.html file as a lab documentation, and we are going to do exercise 1. So exercise 1, basically we are going to run the code that I showed you in the presentation. So here we are exercising function object is assigned into a variable, function object is being passed as an argument, function object is returned as a return value. Okay, all right, so when you do this, things should work as expected. For your own exercise, I want you to create a JavaScript function that adds 2 numbers. Okay, you can name it in any way you want, and assign into a variable, then invoke it, then you can actually pass it to another function, and then you can return its return value. So basically, I want you to create another function of yours and actually exercise these 3 different ways where JavaScript function is being behaving as a first-class object. Okay, all right. So I'm going to give you guys about 5 minutes to try this exercise. Now we're going to talk about the concept of self-invoking function or immediate function. So what is self-invoking function? So typically you are going to define a function and then invoking that function in a separate statement. So here we have defined a function or declare a function, and then we invoke the function in a separate statement. So typically this is what we see in JavaScript code. However, in self-invoking function, you define and invoke a function at the same time. Okay, in a single statement. So because you are invoking the function immediately, you don't have to have a name. So typically self-invoking function is anonymous, but you could have a name if you want to. Okay, as I said, self-invoking function is called sometimes immediately invoked function or immediate function because it gets invoked immediately after it is defined. So let's see the syntax of it. So if you see the syntax on the bottom of this page, first of all, we define the function. That is the definition of a function in blue-colored code. So if you take a look at the blue-colored code, we define a function something, and then we have the function body that contains a single statement. Okay, all right. And then we actually use it as a parenthesis. Once you have a parenthesis, basically, because it's the JavaScript object, okay, we can actually invoke it right away. So the function, we actually have a function object which is captured within that parenthesis, red colored parenthesis, and then JPassion is being passed as an argument, and that will be captured as a something argument inside a function, and in the console the log will just display hello JPassion. Does this make sense? So basically all you do is, instead of using this two-step process of defining the function and then invoking that function in two separate statements, we are doing it in a single statement. We define a function inside this red colored parenthesis. That's a function object, and because it's a function object, we can pass arguments. So this function object receives a single argument, and so we are passing single argument. If you define a function with the two arguments, let's say something comma XYZ, then you should be able to pass two arguments. So it's going to be JPassion comma, and then the second argument value 35 or something like that. Does this make sense? Okay, so this is self-invoking function. So why self-invoking function could be useful? Okay, so we're going to take a look at two examples. One example is quite easy to understand: to avoid global variables conflict. Okay, as I said before, usage of global variable is strongly discouraged because they could be overwritten accidentally. Let me give you an example. There are two JavaScript libraries called the jQuery.js, and there is another one called the prototype.js. And both of these guys are using $sign as a global variable. So if you happen to have both jQuery and prototype.js loaded in your page, the jQuery version of, in this case, jQuery version of $sign will be overwritten by prototype version of $sign. Okay, so you thought, so in this case, you thought, so in your JavaScript code, you thought that you are using jQuery version of $sign, but in fact, it's overwritten by prototype version of it. Okay, so that is a problem. So how you are going to solve it? So the way you are going to solve it is to capture the scope into this immediate invoking function or self-invoking function. So here we have jQuery library and prototype library loaded. Okay, and in jQuery, the way you are going to define $sign is here. We are calling, we define immediate function here. So this function is receiving $sign, and then we can actually use this $sign as a jQuery object. And here we are actually passing jQuery object, and this is unique in jQuery. I mean, prototype certainly does not have it. By the way, in jQuery and $sign is the same thing. So here we are passing jQuery object because this is unique. Okay, but we are receiving as a $sign. Okay, so when we are using this $sign, and we are assured we are using this $sign as a jQuery object. Okay, so what that means is that there is no namespace conflict on this $sign variable. Okay, because this $sign is only inside this function. Okay, that's one usage of the self-invoking function. So self-invoking function is used to avoid global scope variable conflict. Another usage example is the substitute set interval. Okay? So suppose if you are in a situation where you want to run a piece of code, okay, your first thinking might be using set interval. This set interval is the global function you can use in your code. Okay. Now, so if you call this way, set interval and do something function like this. So basically, you are invoking this set something function every 3 seconds, even if do something function has not been finished. Okay. So now what you want to do is you want to make sure the do something function is in fact done before you are actually calling it again. Okay, so in that case you could actually use this code. So again, we are using immediately invoking or self-invoking function. This function name is do something. Okay, so you're gonna do some task, which is in fact the code of do something, and then we set up the time, set time with a do something. So this gets called only when this is actually being the actual task is being done first. Okay, so this is a little bit obscure example of usage of self-invoking function. Yeah, so if you're not really comfortable with this particular example, don't worry about it. Okay. We are going to actually see some of the self-invoking function example moving forward in this code camp. So as long as you understand the syntax of it, I think that should be sufficient for now. Okay. All right, so let's do exercise 2. So let's take a look at the exercise 2. So exercise 2 is basically the code that I mentioned, explained in the slide. Okay. So the self-invoking function is we basically define a function and then we pass it. Okay, so for your own exercise, I want you to create your own self-invoking function who receive 2 arguments. Instead of a single argument, you're going to receive 2 arguments. So define another function called like a function and your function, and then arg1 comma arg2 or something like that. Okay, and then you invoke that function explicitly, and then I want to actually simulate those declaration and invocation of the function as a self-invoking function. Okay, all right, so that is for your own exercise. And self-invoking function of set interval task. Okay, so this is basically what I explained as a second example. Okay, so we have a do something function, and in this case the only thing it does is basically increment the counter, and we just display the counter, and then every 3 seconds we're gonna actually execute it. Okay, so this one is what is the name of this guy's self-invoking function is self-invoking function. Self-invoking function set interval, this one, if you run it, F12. Okay, so every 3 seconds it will actually display these things up to how many times? Looks like it's keep doing it. Okay. All right, so this particular example, I mean, as long as you actually understand the syntax of it, that should be good enough. Okay. All right, so but I want you to do at least wait a minute. Yeah, I want you to do at least to create your own self-invoking function which receive 2 arguments. Okay. Okay, so I'll give you 5 minutes to do this exercise too. Okay, let's move forward. Next topic is function scope. So again, we talk about the concept of scope already. So this is a bit of repeat. Okay. So a variables defined inside a function cannot be accessed from anywhere outside of that function because they are defined only in the scope of that function. So those variables are called local variables, local scope variables. Okay. However, a function can access all variables and functions defined in the same scope the function is defined. Okay, so let me actually explain what I mean by that. A function, so let's say a function could contain another function, right? So we're going to call it inner function defined inside another function, which is called the outer function. So in this case, inner function can access all variables defined in the outer function and any other variable to which that outer function has an access. Okay. And a function defined, so in the case of global scope, that's actually one case, right? A function defined in the global scope can access all variables and functions defined in the global scope. Okay. So this is a case that we have seen before, right? So basically, if you take a look at any of those examples, basically this counter and this function, they're all defined in the global scope. So this function should have an access to counter because this function and this counter, they are defined in the same scope. In this case, it's global scope. Okay. In our case, we're going to actually take a look at an example where we are in fact creating another function inside the another function, inner function, outer function. Okay. Okay, so that is exercise 3. So let's take a look at exercise 3. So in this case, we have these are all global scope, right? So this multiply, because all these functions and variables are defined in the same scope, in this case global scope, they should be able to, this function should be able to access all these variables. Okay, so this function multiply can access var2 and var3. So and this call multiply should be able to access other function as well, because again, they are, you can consider all these guys are properties of the same scope, in this case a window global object scope. Okay, so this function should be able to access this multiply, the function property as well. Okay, so when you call multiply and call multiply, they should work fine. Now this is a case where a function has another function internally. So we have a function called the getScore, okay, and it does define two local variables. So this num1 and num2 are available, I mean accessible only inside this function. Okay, now we have defined another function called the add. Okay, so this add defines its own local variable called the num2. So you see we have a num2 here in outer scope and we have a num2 in inner scope. So inside this add, when it's accessing num2, it should reference this guy. Okay, however, it should be able to access num1 as well as num2. Okay, so, and also it should be able to access name variable as well here. Okay, because that is accessible by outer scope. Okay, so when we say name, scored, and computation, I mean addition of all these three numbers, name 1 is 10, right? And the num2 is going to use the most innermost local variable, local scope variable. So in this case, num2 should be 200, and num3 is the number here, which is 3, right? So it should actually return the 203. Okay, and then this is a function, inner function, and inside inner function we should be able to call add, right? Okay, so and the result of it is going to be returned on getScore method. Okay, so when we call getScore function explicitly, it should say JPassion scored 203. Okay, all right, so that is an exercise. Function scope 2, yeah, in this case we have actually the 4 different sections of code, and I have actually used 1, 2, 3, 4 different segments so that you can actually see the result. Okay, So let's see what happens here. So this is the function scope 2. Control Shift O, function scope 2. So this is the one, and when we run it and press F12, and this is the result you are going to see. Okay, so this is the result from section 1. This is the result from section 2. This is section 2 and section 3, section 4, and section 5. Okay, so we're going to actually experiment with different things here. Okay, so let's take a look at the section 1. So we declare variable in the global scope. Okay, so because this is a global scope, having var or not doesn't make any difference. And then we define a function in the global scope as well. Okay, so when you, by the way, so we're going to talk about the concept of this, right? So this is basically referencing the current object. Okay, so in this case, this in the global scope is referencing global object, which is window. Okay, I think the Firefox, it says DOM window, but in Chrome it will display window. Okay, now you should be able to access this my var and my function as this my var and this my function. Okay, it is the same thing as without. Okay, so let's actually try that. So in this case, this is in fact the same thing, you know. So this is window object, and here I'm visible, and my function is basically null things. You know, it should actually display defined, and that's what we actually seeing here, right? I'm available. The value is my var, and this is a function object. Okay, so this is the same thing as this. So whenever you are just referencing a particular property of the global scope, basically this dot is this dot is omitted. Okay, so you save the change, and you just make sure that we are not cheating. So I'm visible too. Okay, so I'm gonna just say I'm visible too, and we are going to refresh the page. So in this case, yeah, so we are seeing I'm visible too, and that function is also my function object. Okay, so this is the same thing as, you know, this dot. Okay, because the object, this code is actually being executed is in fact window object. Okay, we can certainly call my function. So my function doesn't do anything. Okay, so not a big deal. And the second one, in this case, we are declaring variable in global scope again, and then we defined my function too. In this case, we should be able to access my var2 here as well. Okay, so we are basically assigning I'm visible to my var2. Okay, now if you do var like this, okay, then this guy and this guy is two different things. Okay, so let's actually run this guy first. So if you see the result, that is the result is and then we are just displaying my var2, so it will just display I'm visible, and again it is the same thing as this my var2, and you know, this is the same thing as this function too. However, if you say var here, okay, and I want you to actually try what happens. Okay, so you know, obviously when you have a my var2, this my var2 is different from this guy. So let's actually try it. What do you think it will happen when we try to display my var2? What do you think it will happen? Anybody? So we just have added var to my var2 inside a function. Now we are trying to display the value of my var2. What do you think it will display? Undefined, exactly. Undefined, exactly. Okay, because now it's referencing this guy, right? Okay, and this is not defined. All right. Okay, so I want you to try that. The next one is we are calling my function 2, which is defined right here. Yeah, so we should be able to my var 2. Oh yeah, so this is the case. Let me actually go back here, and oh, you know what? Yeah, this is in fact the undefined here as well. Okay. Yeah. The reason is because yeah. So let's actually, if you take a look at the result, okay, this is undefined, right? Okay. Anybody know why this is the case? It is still undefined. Yeah, we have actually experimented this one before as well. So going back to original code, if you execute this code, okay, so in the section is that section 2. Section 2, it says still undefined. Yeah, exactly. The function has not been invoked, right? So, we haven't invoked this my function 2 yet. That's the reason at this point it comes with undefined. Okay, and this is the same thing. It should come with the undefined. Okay, this my function 2, I mean, that is actually my function 2 property of this object that should be defined. Okay, so now in section 3, we invoked my function 2 here. Okay, and then it should actually display I'm visible, I'm visible, I'm visible, and things like that. Okay, here, however, if you say var, yeah, that was the actual example I was actually trying to say. So if you say var, then this is going to be undefined, right? Okay, because even if you execute this code, is actually, this is the different variable than this guy. Okay, so in section 3, without this var, this is referencing this guy, so this one should work fine. But when you add var here, then we are going to experience undefined here. So let's actually just copy, just save the change, and let's see whether that is in fact the case. So section 3, yeah, section 3, these are undefined. All right, so going back to change and save back, then refresh, then section 3 now is displaying I'm visible. Okay, all right, so that is section 3, and now section 4. So declare variable in the global scope, my var 3, and we also my var 3, my function my var 3, and then yeah, so yeah, this is the same deal. So my var 3 is still undefined, and this should be undefined. This one, my function, this my function 3 is yeah, so this is a case that we are actually assigning function object into my var 4, right? So we have a my var 4 property in the global object. However, this my function 3, this is not playing any role. Even though you have actually a named function, this is not used at all. Okay, so if you try to access my function 3, it will be undefined. Okay, because global object has this guy, my var 4, as a property, not as my function 3. Okay, if you have, let's say, like this, if you define function my function 3, then you should be able to actually have this one defined, and my var 4 is going to be undefined in that case, right? Okay, so in previous example in section 4, you can see my function 3 is undefined, my function 4 is a function objects defined. But if you remove that code, right, and save the change, then it's going to be reversed. So here, so now the 4. So here, my var so my function 3 is now defined, but my var 4 is undefined. Okay, all right. So that is section 4. Section 5, again, we are invoking my var 4. We are just invoking it, okay? And then we should be able to access my var 3, and this my var 3, this function is still undefined, and this is defined, okay? Yeah, so this is a bit of repeat of what we have learned in our previous presentation, but just kind of, to give you a sense of how this scope things in fact is working, okay? Okay, so I'm going to give you guys about 5 to 7 minutes to try this exercise. So we are going to learn the concept of closure. So what is closure? So there is a formal description, and then I came up with a bit more informal description, which could be a bit more the understandable. So formal description says that a closure is an expression. We're talking about typically a function that can have free variables together with an environment that binds those variables. So that's why it is called a closure, because it closed the expression. By the way, in computer programming, the term free variables refers to variables used in a function that are not local variables nor parameters of that function. Okay, yeah, so this is a bit hard to understand. Okay, so let's actually see informal description. So in this case, I came up with a bit more concrete example. A closure gets created when an inner function x is declared, in which when the function gets executed, it is allowed to access variables and other declared inner functions within that outer function. In other words, the same scope the function x is declared. Okay, it might not be any better than the formal description. So let me actually give you an example of closure. So we touched upon this closure a bit. Okay, we didn't actually term it a closure, but we touched upon when the function object gets created. Okay, through definition, it can access the variables and functions of the same scope. Okay. All right, so let's see examples of closure example. So here we define a foo function. Okay, so here we have foo function contains the set of Java statements, right? So it has a 3 JavaScript statement. Sorry about that. So the first one is assigning value 10 to variable x, and then we have a function statement. And then we have a return statement. Okay, so here we have inner function bar and outer function foo. Okay, so the closure example in this case is that when inner function bar is declared, meaning when this function statement is executed, it basically creates a bar object, bar function object. Okay, so which occurs when outer function foo gets executed. So this function statement will be invoked, will be processed only when this foo function is invoked, right? Okay, so this when this first function foo statement is processed, basically it creates a function object, but the code inside that foo function have not been executed, right? So when we invoke this foo function, then this statement gets executed and this statement gets executed. So which means bar function object gets created only when this foo function is invoked. Okay, so this is a definition of the foo, and then when we call foo function, now we have bar function object as well. Okay. All right, so basically just repeat what I said. When the inner function bar is declared, which occurs when the outer function foo gets executed, a closure is formed. So in that closure, the inner function bar, when inner function bar gets executed, it can access the value of all the variables that are in the same scope, in this case x. So when the bar is called, okay, so let's actually go to this statement. So foo gets executed. At that point, the var object gets executed. This statement gets executed, meaning bar function object is created. Okay, so when the bar, so it returns a function, right? So bar function is returned. Okay, so we save that as a return function. So when we call the return function, it has an access to a value of 10 here. So it will return 10. Now that is actually kind of interesting, the twist here. So we have created another var here and assigned to 20. So when you call the return function, which is a bar object, right? it actually accesses innermost function scope, which is actually 10 rather than 20. Does this make sense? Question on this slide. So the closure is that when a function object is created, in this case a bar of function object gets created, it has an access to the values of all the variables. In this case we have only a single variable called x. It has a access to that variable, in this case value 10. That is closure. So if we actually go back to our previous, I actually came up with the better statement. Looks like I didn't really create a PDF file from the latest change, so maybe I do that. Okay, in a few minutes. Okay, so but let's just use this one. So when closure gets created, when inner function x, in this case bar, okay. When the function gets executed, it's allowed to access variables and other declared inner functions within that outer function. In this case, in our example, it is x. Okay. In other words, in the same scope function x, bar is declared. Okay. So that is the closure. Any question on this slide? The question: when bar is defined, does it contain console log.10? Okay. So the question is, let me actually forward the question from the Brahman, forwarding the question before I explain. Okay, so this is a question that was sent. When bar is defined, does it contain console.log10? Okay, the answer is yes. So basically when the bar is defined, basically it contains a value of x. So that is correct statement. Okay, another question from Pooja. But why it took value 10 not 20? X is also global variable. Okay, so let me just forward that question as well. Remember, in our previous example, when the function is accessing a variable, it's actually accessing the most innermost the variable. You remember that? Okay. So when the bar is invoked, when the var is invoked, this x is basically the most innermost value. Okay. So that's the way you could actually think about it. Okay. In this case, is the bar function the closure or the So this is a question from Terry. Let me just forward. Question is, in this case, is the bar function the closure or foo is the closure? So we are talking about bar is the closure. Okay, so when the bar function object gets created, it forms a closure. What that means is that it actually has an access to the value of all the variables in the same scope it is defined for. Okay, so in this case x. Okay, so this is I would say bar function. Okay, so let me there are a few more questions. These are all good questions. Okay, so question from Seha. Is a return function a function? Is return, so let me just forward before I explain. Forwarding. Okay, is the returned function variable, in this case return function variable here, okay, is a function or a variable that holds the value of called foo function, the letter. Okay, so foo function is basically a property of global object in this case. Okay, assuming all these are in the global scope. Okay, if these are all defined in the another function, then then this is the property of that the function object. Okay, so return function property contains a value of a function object of foo. Oh, I'm sorry. This is in fact the return value of foo. Okay, so as I said, this is different from if you say foo parenthesis versus a foo colon. The foo itself is a function object, but this is a case that we are calling foo function. We invoke the function. So the return value of execution of this foo function, which is a bar. So bar function object is assigned to return value. Okay, so yeah, just repeat to Sehar's question. The return function is a function of the it contains the result of invoking a foo function. So and because a foo invoking foo function returns bar function object, it contains bar function object as value. Okay, hopefully that clarifies. Okay, so let's go to the next question. Let me yes, I think I actually kind of misrepresented for this y. The reason you can access y is because it's a global variable, not because it's actually from a closure. Okay, yeah, so I think I misrepresented, at least for x. So in this case, x is actually from a closure. This y is from a global variable. Okay, so hopefully that clarifies it. Okay, so let's resume. So let's see some of the example usages of this closure. Okay, so we just learned the mechanics of closure, and now let's see how we can use it. So why use closure? So by using closure, you can reduce the amount of and complexity of code. Okay, and in some cases, not using closure is going to actually make your code almost impossible to write. Okay, so examples of closure enabled code: make variables private, indexing in a loop, and timer. So we're going to actually take a look at some examples of this. The first one is make variables private. So JavaScript doesn't have special syntax for private members. So in Java, you can use private or protected, the modifier, to assign some privacy scope to it, right? But in JavaScript, there is no the special syntax for that. Okay, but you could actually make some variables private by using closure. Okay, so this is one usage of a closure. So let's say we define a person function object. Okay, so a person function object has private properties called a name, and then we have my private get age method with a function. So what we want to do is that we want to have this name property and my private age method property to be private. Okay, meaning we do not want outside of this function, outside is of the person, should be able to access this name and my private get age method directly. Instead, these properties will be accessible only through another method. So in this case, we have a get person info method, and that contains a function object, and that function object is going to access this name and then it's going to call my private get age method. Okay, so so we are going to, so this is the constructor function. So from the constructor function, we are going to create an object, person object, which contains a name and my private get age method properties. So now when you're trying to call myPerson.name directly, okay, it is in fact undefined, okay, because we are trying to access the local scope variable, not from the function, outside of the function. So that is undefined, right? That's something you know. And if you try to call this method, myPrivateGetAge method, again, this is only defined, okay, inside this person function. So if you try to directly access it, that is not allowed, okay. Now in order to, now we are going to use only this private public method, okay, get personal info method, okay. So that's the only case we are going to call directly, and the inside it will be able to access these properties. Does this make sense? Okay. All right, so this is one usage of closure example, okay. So in this case, the closure is this: when this function object gets created, it will form a closure, okay. And that is when this statement, when you are creating a brand new object of person, that's when these statements will be executed, right? And in this case, we created a function object, and when this function object is created, it now has an access to all the variables and methods that are defined in the same scope, in this case name and myPrivateGetAge method, okay. Does that make sense? So you know, again, closure is formed only when a function object gets created, and whatever value of those local variables in the same scope will be accessible to that function object when the function object, in this case this function object, gets created, invoked. Okay, question from Shile. Is it because we have used this before get person info? That is correct, okay. We have in fact have two cases of closure, but this closure is not that much useful because this function object is not really accessing any other things, but it could actually access it if you want to, right? Okay. This is a case that the closure is more useful because inside that closure, it in fact access name and myPrivateGetAge method. Okay. Does that make sense? Yeah, I hope the shell does that answer question. So it's not really just for this case, okay, but you know, again, closure is formed when function object gets created, okay. Then when function object gets created, that when the function object is invoked, it can access all the variables and methods that are defined in the same scope, okay. So that is a closure, okay. Okay, moving forward, that's one usage example of the closure. So that is exercise 5.1. Since closure is a little bit kind of complex concept, you can actually do this exercise one by one. So here, this is a case. So this is the one that I just showed you. Okay, it's the same code, right? Okay. So when you we create a person object from a person constructor, and the name is this is undefined, and now so when you actually try to access this one, is going to be undefined, and this one should work fine. So let's actually run this guy. Closure usage make private. Closure private. Oops. Okay, so when we run it, okay, so things are working as expected. So this one should be undefined. So you can see it is undefined. And now if you try to run this guy, meaning if you're trying to access those that private method of this guy, it will be is actually undefined method as well. So if we run it, yeah, you can see my private age method is not a function. Okay, so that is an exercise. I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to try this one, and then we'll move on to the next example. The next example is a bit more complex. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So another example where you could use closure. In fact, we are going to use a bit nested version of the closure. So this is a classic problem in JavaScript. So suppose if you want to have, so we have a function definition called add links to example. So what we want to do this, let me actually show you what I mean by this behavior first, and I'll explain it. This is the closure loop in this example 1. And let me just run this guy. Oh, this is not loop example. You guys not hearing me okay? Yeah, so A says there seems to be no audio. Can you hear me okay? As far as I can tell, the audio should be, so let's just resume. This one is loop example. Yeah, I actually gave the wrong name of this guy. Yeah, so this is the one that actually kind of we already covered. Yeah, so I should not say this is the index loop example. This is, I'm gonna just rename it. Rename usage closure. Okay, so I just renamed it because it's not about the loop. Yeah, so this is the one we actually covered already. So when you define my function, and this is the case that we define x10, then we are assigning x to 20. So when you run it, it will actually return the 10 instead of 20. Okay, so that's something we covered. The one I'm actually talking about is loop. Okay, so let me actually show you what I'm talking about. So let me just execute this code. What's going on here? What did I do wrong here? Oh, looks like I have okay. Yeah, so example yeah, looks like I have incorrect code, so I have to change this one to this one. Yeah, I'll actually update it. So let me just save the change and run it. Okay, so the problem is, what I want to do is if I click any of this link, I want to display the correct value. So in this case, oops, this is the correct case. Yeah. All right, so let me example in this case. Oh, this one should be 1. My apology. Okay. Now, oops. Okay, let me just save the change, and then we have to refresh it. Oh, okay, good. So yeah, so this is the case where things are not working, and this is a case it works. So what I want to do is that we have a link. Okay, so whenever I click a link, in this case it always returns 5. Returns 5, this is returns 5, this is return 5, and this is incorrectly behaving code. So this is actually correct code. So when I click this one, it returns 0, it returns 1, and returns 2, and returns 3 and 4. Okay, so this is actually using correct closure, and this is not using a correct closure. Okay, let's take a look at the code. So this is the case. We are creating, basically, we are creating an element called A, and then we are adding this link without closure. So this is the case, so we are just adding this value I. So that is this link 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. And then what we did is that for this link, we actually associated a function that alerts this value of I. Okay, and we can also actually display the value of, so if I display this guy, this is always like returning 5. Okay, so this one is returning 5. This one is returning 5 instead of 3 and 4. So this is the correct working case. When I clicked it 2, it returns 2. When I click this guy, it returns 4. So so we're gonna just focus on alert. Okay, so this is kind of badly behaving code, while this guy is actually correctly behaving code. Okay, all right. So let me actually explain. So this is the example where things are not behaving correctly. Okay, so here, when we assign this function object to onClick. So the what happens is that when you are when this function object gets created, okay, when function object gets created, the value I is going to be always the latest value when this function, when this I should actually, it looks like I kind of incorrectly changed these two values. Okay, so this is the same thing. I should say add links example 1 rather than add without closure. Okay, so when this function is invoked, okay, this code will be executed. The latest value of I is in fact 5, and that is the value that is set to this function. Okay, because when function object gets created, okay, when function object gets created, it will in fact use the latest value of I, which happened to be 5. Okay, because when all this code is actually executed, the value of I equals 5. Okay, so that's the reason this alert is always set to 5. This I is always set to 5. So this is actually, incorrect way of doing things. Instead, what we can do is we are going to in fact use the self-invoking function. So we are going to actually a self-invoking function value, and then the value of this guy, okay, is in fact set with the I. So basically, when this function object gets created, the value is gonna be, this value is gonna be set to correct value, like a 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so this is in fact the correct way of writing code. So in this case, outer function is self-invoking function. In other words, outer function is defined and invoked, and the outer function gets invoked when the correct index, which will be the value of that inner function, takes when it gets executed. Okay, yeah, it's a little bit convoluted example. Okay, so I'm gonna actually let you do this exercise. Yeah, but the thing is that there is in fact some syntax errors. I apologize that. Okay, so basically you have to change this guy to add links example 1, and then you have to change this guy add example 2, and you have to actually call eggs example 2. Okay, so let me just yeah, I'll correct the hands-on lab exercise. So question from where does add links with the closure get value from? So that is actually coming from this guy. This I is actually passes an argument. So that is the value set with the value. Okay. Does that answer your question? So this is immediately invoking function, right? Okay, so we define this function object, and then we are invoking immediately, passing I. Okay, so that value I is going to be set as the as a closure. Okay, my audio is gone. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Jared, can you hear me okay now? Okay, so everybody seems to hearing okay. Let's move forward. The last topic is a bit easier one: global object and non-global object and this. So you already have some exposure to this guy. So what is a global object? So global object is that basically it is the top level object that contains all the global variables and functions. So all global variables and functions become properties of this global object. So in HTML based browser, this global object is in fact window. Okay, so in this case, global object is the owning object of all global variables and global functions. So these global variables and functions are properties of this global object. Make sense? All right. What about this? So in JavaScript, this refers to the object that a function is a method of, meaning it is an object where that function is a property of. Okay, so in global scope, it refers to the global object. So in this case, this is a global property, this is a global property, right? So when you say console.dir.this, you are going to see this and this as properties of window object. Okay, so that's something we already have seen, right? Okay, now let's take a look at a case where we have non-global scope. Okay, so we have a person object variable, and then we have these properties, right? First name, last name, age, and tell your age, and then we have a function object. Okay, so in this case, when you say console.dir and this, it will point this person object. Okay, because this is referencing an object where this function is in fact the property of. Okay, so in this case, it will return person object. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's do exercise 6. So exercise 6, and so this is the same code. So you can actually see the window object. You can see my global function and my global variables are the properties of that window object. So that is a code. So this guy, my global variable, and my global function, those are properties of window object. In the case of person object, if you see console.dir, it should actually point to person object. Okay, so let's actually try that. Yeah, this is window. Yeah. Okay, so this is the global object HTML. Oh, this is just actually exercising that guy. Okay, this is the one non-global object. So this is the one that we have this code. So non-global object. So here we have a person object, and then a person object. Yeah, actually I should have console.dir here. Oh, we have that right. Sorry about that. We have that right here. Okay, yeah, so that's the right place to go. Okay, so let's actually run this guy. So press F12. So the first one is window object. The second one, this is the person object. You can see person object. You can see it's a person object that contains age, first name, and last name. Tell your age. Okay. So that is coming from this guy. All right. Okay, so I'll give you 5 minutes to finish this exercise, and then we're going to move on to probably the last topic of the today, which is inheritance.